Thank you, Sean, and I'm glad to be with you all again tonight. And so I'm going to talk about the relational benefits of forgiving, but I'm going to do it in a narrower way by just looking at how forgiveness operates in marriage and let you think about ways that these also apply to other relationships, such as friendships or work relationships, which aren't always quite as close as marriage relationships. So anyway, I'm going to kind of approach this in a focused way rather than a broad way. So I'd just like to invite you to think about the answer to this question. What is it that causes a great marriage? So, you may look at these suggestions up on the screen and you may think that you have another one or two things that you think might cause a great marriage. But a lot of people think it's because people have a good sexual relationship or they have good communication. So good marriage is caused by good communication. And if you have bad communication, your marriage is not so good. Or maybe good marriages are being able to resolve differences that you have and conflicts when the differences become conflicts, or that few arguments happen, or people are able to share intimately with each other. Well, one of the suggestions that has been made is that a good marriage is caused by a high ratio of positive to negative interactions. In fact, this was a suggestion made by psychologist John Gottman, and he predicted, he said, if you give me 10 minutes of recorded behavior of a couple communicating, I can tell you with 94% certainty, not 93% certainty, not 95% certainty, but 94% certainty whether that couple will be together and happy 4 years from today. And I'm going to do it on the basis of one measure, and that is a ratio that they have of positive to negative interactions. If it's 5 to 1 or greater, they'll be together. If it's below 5 to 1, first of all, it probably won't be 4, 3, 2, or 1. It's going to be a low ratio if it's not 5 to 1. Well, when couple therapists heard this, they immediately latched onto it and said, oh, then what we need to do is train people to be more positive in their communication, and we'll get that ratio up to 5 to 1 and everything will be great. Well, that set off really a large bunch of researchers who study couple relationships, who basically said, it can't be this simple. And, I'm going to show that John Gottman actually was dropped on his head as a baby. He doesn't know what's going on. And so they set off to investigate what causes a good relationship. And what was found was, well, okay, so a 5 to 1 ratio is actually a really good predictor of a good relationship, but it's not the cause of the good relationship. It's actually the product of a good relationship. So a good relationship is not caused by having positive communications many more than negative, but rather when people have a good relationship, then they do have better communication as a product, as a result of that good relationship. Well, then what's the cause of a good relationship? Well, probably 20 different researchers pretty much came to the same conclusion about 10 years after John Gottman's announcement in 1993 about the 5 to 1 ratio. And I would summarize the cause of a good relationship is this: couples who can form, maintain, grow or strengthen, and repair when damaged a strong emotional bond between them. So let me just look one by one at that. And, forming a strong emotional bond. Well, in the early years of a relationship, things are new and things are exciting. Almost every experience is new, and so forming the bond is something new and exciting and challenging, and there are new things to look forward to. There's all kinds of novelty that's going on in the relationship. So love is being formed, and that love is, I define, as valuing the other person, not devaluing or putting down or treating the person as less the other person. And that love of valuing the other person comes about often because partners are able to have a sense of humility. That is, they're able to be realistic about their strengths and weaknesses, to be open to being taught if how to correct weaknesses, to be modest in the way they present themselves, and to be other oriented, to value the other person. So that humility and love are really tied together in that strong emotional bond that people are trying to form. In addition, what helps to form that strong emotional bond is to be able to listen to the other person attentively and empathically, and that, as you pay attention and you listen, you are showing that you value the other person. You're building that love emotional bond. Another part of forming that strong emotional bond is to have positive emotional responding when the other person experiences something. If it's exciting, we get excited with them. If it's painful, we are sympathetic to them, and we are matching their emotionality by our own, and we're sticking with it so that they can savor the good experiences, and so that they really know that we care when their experiences are not as good. So another thing that happens early in relationships that helps form that strong emotional bond is to spend time with the other person. That shows that you're other oriented, that you're willing to value the other person with your time, and to be interested in the things that they are interested in. So I said it. A good relationship is those who can form a strong emotional bond, but also maintain and strengthen a strong emotional bond. Well, we're always going to experience challenges, and there are some challenges that just happen. Partners lose their enthusiasm for their marriage often fairly early on in the relationship, say within the first 6 months. Um, why is that? Well, it's because all of those things that were new and exciting at the beginning turn out, they just aren't new anymore. And so we're used to them. And although they're pleasurable, they don't give you that same rush of you know dopamine neurotransmitter that just is motivating. In fact, in terms of even sex, people can start to feel that it's routine even within the first 6 months of a marriage relationship. And then, of course, problems happen. And one of the most predictable times that divorces happen is about a year and a half after people are married. This is because the relationship starts to have problems that we kind of overlook in the beginning, but then they start to grate on us, and we start to try to try to solve those problems. And if they don't yield right away, then often what happens is people coast apart. And by another year of dealing with those problems that they've been worrying about, then they decide to split up. So, so what helps partners maintain strong emotional bonds? Well, it's patience with the other person. It's being grateful for the positive things that you see in the other person, the positive traits the other person has. It's continuing to be empathic and humble in your relationship, and especially to avoid a particular toxic emotion, which is contempt. So contempt, contempt, it's the one where you kind of roll your eyes around and, really, do we have to go here again? How many times do we have to do this? Well, John Gottman found that there is a very predictable road that leads to the dissolving of a relationship. And that is that partners in the beginning start to be critical of each other. At first, they're critical in their own minds, and then they start to voice those criticisms, and then they start to tell others about the criticism with the partner. Well, the partner is also being defensive often, and first they're defensive in their own mind, and then after a while they start defending themselves back in the relationship, and then they start defending themselves to other people who are just bystanders, maybe in-laws or friends. Well, those are problems, in that we all have. There are times when, we feel criticized by our partner, except of course my wife never criticizes me, but, other people I understand experience this. But the real turning point in a relationship is a shift in which the person stops being critical of events and things that the other person does and starts taking it to the personal level and being critical of the other person as a person, and showing contempt for them as a person. And that's absolutely toxic. That's where relationship satisfaction just falls off the table, when people start to be contemptuous of each other. And what that leads to is it leads to one of two things: either war, in which people are fighting all the time, or what Gottman calls stonewalling, which is to say, you can't get to me. I'm a rock feels no pain, and you can't touch me. Now, it turns out that communities can help relationships by supporting the partners, and supporting them as a partnership, not just supporting them as an individual. Often when a person has complaints and they come to a best friend, the best friend really supports their complaints, and that ends up having a kind of a negative effect of driving people further apart instead of bringing them closer together. So there is a kind of a balancing act of being able to support the other person, but not so much that it drives the other person, that it drives a wedge between the partners. So how do we strengthen the emotional bond? Take the initiative to express love, show that you are willing to value and not devalue the other person. Be conscientious at practicing again and again, valuing the other person. Maintain hope. So some hope is aimed at solving problems. I'm hopeful that I can solve the problems, but persevering hope is to say, I have hope about this marriage or this relationship, that it is going to prevail. And it doesn't have to do with solving problems so much. Also, having patience, cultivating patience. and doing it right now, absolutely right now, because, it's important to have patience now. And then to be able to have hard conversations when we need to have those hard conversations, but to be sensitive in the way that we do that and not just attack the other person. So there are all kinds of problems that pop up in relationships. I just listed a bunch of them. I'm just going to read down the list. Financial problems of all kinds, where basically it boils down to they treat finances differently, the partners do. In-law problems, infidelity sometimes pops up. The balance of power in the relationship between the partners can be an issue in which they're struggling over who has the power. Different expectations about who ought to experience and express emotion. Domestic violence, substance abuse, emotional abuse and neglect. Spouse has personal problems such as mental health problems that become very difficult for the partner to deal with. And then the system can put pressures on us, as we know from this whole COVID pandemic, how societal pressures can add stress to our personal relationships. So now, I think this is a really important point. John Gottman, I've already quoted him twice. This is the third time, but he says, all marriages have problems, more or less. Some marriages have very few problems, but they all have problems. About a third of the marriages very seldom have problems. About a third of the marriages have a moderate amount of problems. They fuss and they make up. And about a third of the marriages that are successful marriages have a lot of problems, and they fuss and they fight emotionally. And there are people who, aren't able to deal with those problems. So Gottman says it really is not the fact of having problems that is the make it or break it part of a relationship. It's how we deal with those problems. And a very good way to deal with it is to cultivate the ability to just accept that we're going to have this problem. We are not going to solve this problem. If I have a problem dealing with my mental health, say I have an anxiety problem, it drives my partner crazy because I'm getting anxious over everything, chances are I'm going to continue to have that problem. And hopefully my partner will be able to say, I can just accept that. I have problems too. And so, we're going to try to accept each other. So this is, I think, a very important point to having good relationships, is not to think we have to solve all the problems. We have to resolve every conflict, but rather we solve the problems we can solve, but we accept the differences that we can't solve. So couples who form a good relationship and those who maintain and grow strong emotional bonds, those are important to marriages being strong marriages. So how do we maintain and grow? Stay aware of the good that the partner has brought to your life. Be grateful for that partner. Savor the time you have together. Accept that no marriage is perfect. There's going to be problems. And on things you can't change, find some kind of workaround that lets you accept the difference without continuing to ruminate about it, because that rumination builds unforgiveness, which builds mental health problems. It builds those negative emotions and negative affect. And then to avoid secondary problems, which are being upset because we can't solve all of our problems. So this is more advice about maintaining and growing strong emotional bonds. Pause to appreciate the positive, count your blessings. Imagine what would life be like if you didn't have your partner. Just bring to mind your partner's strengths. Appreciate moments that are positive moments. Savor them, focus on them. Focus on new challenges that require discernment, that is, figuring out what's important, effort and adaptation. So, I'm a tennis player, or at least I used to be a tennis player when I could actually walk on a tennis court, but now I play pickleball. It's a smaller court, but nevertheless, like a tennis player, if I'm going to improve, what I have to do is I have to think about, what am I going to work on today when I go out to hit? I don't just go out to hit, but I say, I've been missing my forehand, so I'm going to practice hitting my forehand deep today. Or I've been missing my drop shots, I'm going to practice drop shots today. And this is what has to happen in relationships too, is, I may say, I have not really been very sympathetic and empathic with my partner. I'm going to practice that today. So what I want to do is, you remember how in the forming of the relationship, everything is new. Everything is a new experience. Well, I want to do that as much as possible in my relationship. I want to create unexpected, unpredictable, positive moments to the degree that I can in my relationship. And that means introducing variety, doing things differently, surprising your partner. I can remember a time where I decided I was going to surprise Kirby just for no reason. But what I did is I made an audio tape, and with these two voices on it, I used these two voices, and these guys were kidnappers, and they were kidnapping Everett. That would be me. And so, they had this conversation about how we're going to get ransom, and we're going to, and so they go back and forth with this conversation. I left this for her, telling her that she can find a clue to where they're keeping me if she goes to a certain place. Well, I then managed to post cues, written clues around in 4 different places that led her around the city, driving in the west end of Richmond, Virginia, and finding 4 clues. And the final clue was at a park that we used to like to walk around a lake. And so I could see when she arrived at that park and she was walking down toward the lake. And I went over into the woods and I took this masking tape and I taped myself to a tree. It had about 3 loops of masking tape. I'm struggling manfully against the binding here. And so then she comes around and she rescues me. Oh, this was wonderful. And the kidnappers, they're back probably looting our house, but they left this picnic for us to kind of keep us out of their hair while they're probably doing everything that they can to take away all of our goods that we have. Well, anyway, that was a very memorable time, both for her and for me. And but that's the kind of thing, surprise your partner. Don't let things become routine. Change up the routines. So forming bonds is usually easy, and it's driven by attraction and sex and new experiences and excitement. Maintaining and strengthening bonds is more about changing what can be changed, accepting the imperfections of the other person, and seeking novel ways to create newness and excitement rather than to discover it like we did when we're forming the bonds. We're creating that newness in an ongoing relationship. But as John Gottman pointed out, there are inevitably ruptures of some kind in the relationship. These happen because people are people. So couples who can repair when damaged strong emotional bonds are also the couples that have strong relationships and happy marriages. So what can tear a relationship apart? Well, I've already mentioned it once. It's kind of going through that John Gottman cascade of relationship dissolving, moving from the criticism defensiveness phase, which is kind of happening in every relationship, more or less, and changing to that contempt that we feel for the person. If I feel that at all, I have to deal with that ruthlessly right away, apologetically. I have to, treat that in itself as a relationship rupture and try to get over that so that we don't get to the stonewalling or war phases. So how do we repair damaged emotional bond? Well, it's a relationship, so it's a two-way thing. And so it's going to involve what the wrongdoer did, the person who hurt the other person, and also how the person who got hurt, who is what I'm going to call the victim, how that person responds. So the wrongdoer needs to confess to what they did. They need to empathize with the person that I've caused you harm. I can see that I've caused you harm, and tell the person, I can see because, you were crying and, or you got suddenly withdrawn into yourself, show that you are attentive to their emotional state. The wrongdoer needs to express remorse and regret and sorrow over what he or she has done. And then try to make amends of some type. Try to, is there anything I can do to make up for what I've done? And then ask for forgiveness. Can you forgive me for doing this a specific event? And then it helps often to, if you've done all of those things, especially if the victim has forgiven you, it helps to experience self-forgiveness and not keep blaming yourself and beating yourself up once it's been dealt with within the relationship. So the victim, the person hurt, has also a part in this. The victim needs to empathize with the partner and see, why did the partner do this? Surely they didn't just get up in the morning and say, I'm going to really hurt this person I love. Although sometimes that does happen, but rarely does it happen. Usually people they're trying to do a good thing for the relationship. It just goes south. It just, doesn't work well. And so you need to empathize with the person who hurt you to see what they might have been thinking and feeling and why did they do what they did. Don't judge what they did. Forgive them. Discuss how these wrongs can be prevented in the future. I just, covered what might take a very long time by just giving 4 little phrases. So the fact that I can say it quickly doesn't mean it happens quickly. It may take the person hurt quite a while to work through the hurt. Basically, what's happening, I talked in the first night about the injustice gap that a wrong creates, and how big gaps are hard to deal with and little gaps are easier to deal with when the wrongdoer confesses and takes responsibility and empathizes, expresses remorse and regret and sorrow, makes amends. All of those are reducing the size of the injustice gap because the victim knows those are costly, those are hard to do. So the victim acts in humility and generosity and love, valuing, not devaluing the partner, and then tries to transcend that injustice gap by mixing and matching the various ways that people deal with injustice, by doing things that make it more fair, by turning the matter over to God, by forbearing and just saying, for the good of the relationship, I'm not going to make a big deal out of this, by tolerating what is done, by accepting, again, just accept, I'm going to just move on. This is not a big deal. This is not going to end our relationship. And also by forgiving. And I can mix and match all of those. What that's going to do is it's going to help the partners reconcile with each other. So reconciliation is restoring trust that was damaged. And the way that trust is restored is through mutually trustworthy behaviors. So that means both people have to be trying to be trustworthy. We don't grant trust to the other person. Trust is earned because we can see the other person is trying to be trustworthy. They may be failing at times because we are all human. I may be failing at times as well as my partner. But trust is going to build if we're trying to be trustworthy. And then hope, of course, fuels that repair. So, so forgiveness is important in there. You know, we mentioned that, and this series is about forgiveness. And so we want to do two types of forgiveness. You know, we want to forgive by making a decision to treat the person differently, to treat them as a person who's valued. Notice that I've already said about 10 times, value your partner. That's the essence of love. So we want to decide to treat them as a valued human being. And then we also want to replace the negative emotions we might have with positive, other-oriented emotions like sympathy and empathy and love for the person. So far, what are the take-home points here? Pursue the causes of a good couple relationship. The things that form and maintain and build and repair strong emotional bonds, and those include valuing the other person, humility, forgiveness, patience, self-control, agreeableness, empathy, among other things. Avoid, like the plague, contempt. Not, you know, if I slide into that, get it out of my life as quickly as I can. Practice tolerance, or even better, practice accepting the things that can't be changed, and forgiving when wrongs happen. And then good communication, that 5-to-1 ratio, will likely follow if you're practicing those virtues. So let me talk just a little bit about how we might reconcile. So far I've said, well, reconciliation is a restoration of trust, and it's trying to be trustworthy, but it's got to be a little more than that. So let's see if we can dig down into what good reconciliation might be. So one thing that we can do to promote reconciliation is to practice narrowing that injustice gap. So the injustice gap is the gap between the way I'd like to see this resolved and the way it currently stands. So I practice resolving that, and I can deal with that by getting even with the person, not really recommended for a good partner relationship. Bringing justice or fairness back into the relationship. This may take a heart-to-heart talk about how we can be more fair with each other. Turn it over to God, for God to judge. Turn it over to God just because I'm releasing it to God. Forbear, that is, respond, not respond with negativity. Tolerate, just, okay, I'll grit my teeth and just tolerate it this time. Accept and move on, and forgive. Decisional forgiveness is an intention statement stating my intent not to seek revenge, but to treat the person as a valued and valuable person. And then emotional forgiveness is being able to replace negative, unforgiving emotions with positive, other-oriented emotions. So, how do we decide to forgive? So this is like trying to get practical. How do we decide to forgive? And what I did is I read a couple of books, actually about 3 books, on how people, their stories about how they came to forgive someone who had hurt them. And I tried to figure out what was common with the stories that people tell when they decide to forgive. And I think one thing that's common is that the wronged person decides, I'm going to give up my expectations that this will turn out exactly like I want it to. The expectations are that I can do something, I can do anything to earn this person's love. Well, it's just almost impossible to make someone love us, especially if they're not feeling positively toward us. I have to give up the expectation that I'm going to recover everything that was lost or taken from me by the offender's acts. I give up the expectation the offender will change and will be exactly like I want them to be, or the person will come to some kind of justice. I give up the idea that the person is going to grovel before me and vindicate me and come around and say, yes, you were absolutely right. I don't know what got into me. And occasionally that happens, but usually I'm well off giving up that assumption because it's likely not going to happen. So the offender also changes behavior. The offender accepts responsibility for wrongs, conveys understanding that he or she has hurt the partner, offers a good apology, makes amends or restitution for what's done, and then convinces the partner that I'm going to try not to do this again. What is happening if the offender does this is this conveys that I'm being vulnerable and that I hope never to hurt you this way again. So that changes people's perspective. Both sides get their perspective changed. Okay, so I'm looking at my time right here and thinking, what do I want to do with the amount of time that I have left? Let me talk just a bit about how people talk to each other about wrongs that are done. So what usually happens if my partner hurts my feelings in some way is I, as the victim, the one who's been hurt, I make what's called a reproach. So a reproach is a request that the person explain why they did what they did. Now, I can make a really aggressive, negative reproach. I can say, how could you do such a stupid thing? I can't believe you did this. You have the sensitivity of a gravel sidewalk. These kind of reproaches are not going to help the person want to explain things in a genteel way. And so I want to make a reproach that gives the partner the kind of the benefit of the doubt and say, usually you don't, you're sensitive. And so I was really puzzled when you said such and such a thing. And, I just wonder if you can help me understand what went on. So what I'm doing is instead of blaming them, I'm saying, I am having a problem understanding. Can you help me understand this? Well, that doesn't fix the problem, but it usually helps the offender at least give you a decent account and not just a negative response back, which usually is to blame you for what you did 2 days ago. So the offender responds to a reproach with an account. And so there are some accounts that are not good, and that's like a denial, I didn't do anything wrong. A justification, yeah, I did wrong, but I was justified in doing it because of what you did before. Or an ill-timed excuse where the person just jumps in and says, yeah, I got 28 excuses for why I lost my temper. So those are not good accounts. A good account is usually a confession. And a confession involves a certain number of steps that I really summarize with summarize with an acrostic: confess. C, confess without excuse. O, offer an apology. N, note the other person's pain. This is the empathy. So C, confess without excuse. O, offer an apology. N, note the other person's pain. F, forever value the person and convey to the person, I value our relationship more than I value being right on this. E, equalize. What can I do to make up for what I've done? S, say, I'm going to never again, say, I'm going to try not to hurt you this way again. And then S, the final S, is seek forgiveness. So that leads to then putting the ball back in the court of the person who was hurt, of the victim. And the victim has a choice at that point, and the choice is usually to respond to the confession with either, nope, I'm not going to forgive. That's usually not a good choice. That's going to split the people further apart. Or the person can say, okay, I forgive you. But that might not be very realistic. If the wrongdoer has pondered this for 3 or 4 days and then offered an apology, it's not really realistic to expect that the person deeply hurt is all of a sudden going to say, oh yeah, of course I forgive you. Well, I could say that perhaps about decisional forgiveness. I have made a decision to forgive you. I'm going to treat you, as a valued and valuable person. But I still have some hurt, quite a bit of hurt. And that may take me a while to get over. So there is some kind of statement about a decision to forgive, as opposed to emotional forgiveness, which takes a lot longer. And then the offender needs to try to forgive themselves if something has happened that has brought this to a positive end. And I have 6 steps to forgiving ourselves. One is receive God's forgiveness. I go to God with this. Repent and try to repair the relationship. Reduce my ruminations so that I don't, keep harping on myself and what a terrible person I am. Step 4, make a decision that I'm going to forgive myself, and then seek to reach emotional self-forgiveness. And that's, you can work through the 5 steps of reach. And then realize that I need to accept myself as a person who is not perfect, who is going to fail. And then resolve not to allow this and things like it to happen again. Well, I wish I had all the time in the world to explain more about this. This is probably a 2 or 3 hour talk crunched down into 40 minutes. But let me just point out what those 5 steps to reach forgiveness are recall the hurt. I have to recognize that I have hurt you, or I have hurt myself in the case of self-forgiveness. Empathize. I need to empathize with the person, see where they were coming from. If I've hurt myself, I need to empathize with myself and say, if somebody else did this to me, I would try to see where they're coming from. So let me give myself a break. A, give an altruistic gift of forgiveness, one that I don't deserve. And then C, commit to the emotional forgiveness I've experienced so that I, H, hold on to that forgiveness when I doubt. So I hope you can see that there are a lot of relational benefits to forgiving. If you make a decision to forgive, then that is usually what's seen, because you're treating the other person differently. And that will lead to a much more open attitude toward you in the relationship, and that will lead the other person to be softer emotionally toward you. So there are relational benefits to forgiving, and just to kind of tie this together, that means also better relationships is going to filter down into better mental health, less depression, less anxiety, less negative emotions that I'm dealing with all the time in a troubled relationship. And that will also filter down into better physical health, less of those cardiovascular events that happen when I feel stressed, less cortisol that is going to be coursing through my body and damaging every system of my body. So by forgiving in a relationship and reconciling or working toward reconciliation, we also develop a kind of a mental health benefits and physical health benefits. And here is where you can find the resources that you could work through relationship issues and individual issues of forgiving another person or forgiving yourself at my website there at worthington-forgiveness.com. So I wish I had a chance to go all the way through this. I'm sure Sean will make the slides available and you can see what I didn't cover then, but thank you for being with me.
Thank you very much, Professor Worthington. That was very insightful, and maybe a future webinar would be considering walking through the REACH steps a little bit more in depth, and that could be something we could look at. But this has been very insightful, I think, particularly with regards to relationships and their benefits, forgiveness role in that. And we do have some questions, and if you wouldn't mind, I'd moderate them. And one of the first questions that we have is, let's get there. Why do couples move into contempt for each other?
I think one of the reasons is probably that they do ruminate about negative issues, and they think we should be able to solve this, and we think, I'm trying hard to solve this. Every time she says something that's provocative, I am wrestling with it, and I'm going, no, don't respond to this, and so I'm not, but I'm not seeing her do anything about this. But she probably didn't see me do anything about this, because she can't see what I don't do. And if I am able to respond patiently and calmly, then she doesn't see that I'm doing anything. So I have to realize, that's the way it is. We're not going to be able to see what the other person does necessarily, and so when we start worrying about, I can't solve this problem, and we can't solve this problem, then it becomes a much bigger problem that if I just accepted it, it would have been okay. And that it's now a bigger problem. That is the slide into it must be something wrong with her, to be contemptuous about. So I think that's kind of the progression of getting into that slide into contempt.
Now, would this be, you focus tonight on couples, but would this dynamic also play out, for example, in the workplace between colleagues or in family situations between a parent and a child? So is it only mostly in a couple's scenario, or is this can be extrapolated to other relationships?
Yeah, this is totally extrapolated to pretty much all social relationships. So John Gottman has looked at this dynamic in organizations and business organizations. There's a kind of an economist named Arthur Brooks that's actually extended it into political realm. I mean, gosh, do the opposing parties today feel contempt for each other or what? I mean, this is like probably what is necessary to get over a lot of the polarization that goes on in politics. So this is true in families. John Gottman has looked at parenting relationships as well as business relationship, as well as couples. This dynamic extends throughout all relationships.
That's very helpful. It also makes me wonder if that old adage comes into play where we tend to judge others by their actions and ourselves by our intentions. And so we tend to be a little bit more lenient, we meant well, but they surely didn't mean well.
Exactly. And we don't see their intentions. We only see their actions. And like I say, a lot of action in preventing conflict is what you don't do.
Mm-hmm. Another question is, what if both persons in the same situation share the blame of being offender or victim, both, but in different ways? So it's not like in the situation one is wrong and the other one's right. It is both share offender victim status in the same situation. What happens there?
Well, that of course is a very common situation, and the way that we try to help troubled couples deal with it in couple counseling is to take responsibility for what you've done and not worry about what the other person's done. And so if I apologize and take responsibility for what I've done and then seek to make amends and apologize, often the other person is going to be much more likely to do the same thing.
Okay, thank you for that. Someone else has asked, how would you deal with someone who overreacts or is extremely emotional and just doesn't respond well, whether that's the victim or the offender? How do you approach that?
Well, that has as a personality characteristic, that has a label, and it's called neuroticism, but that's an old label. And what we call it today is emotional reactivity or emotional volatility. Well, it turns out that's one of the 5 or 6 main personality characteristics. And the problem with personality characteristics is they're changeable, but it usually takes 3 years of intensive effort to change your personality,
Wow.
especially in a major way. So, if the person is being very emotionally reactive, this is a great time to say, they're probably not going to change. I need to accept that. And I need for us to try to find some kind of workaround if we can, to where maybe he or she stops, or tries to slow themselves down. And I give them a break more and, and don't fly off the handle in reaction to their emotionality. So, acceptance turns out in that personality realm to be the best solution because, you notice that I mentioned change what you can change and then accept the things you can't change. Well, people can change personality, but it's hard. And what if they said they didn't like my personality because I'm not very reactive emotionally? I'm not really actually willing to change. I'm kind of satisfied with my personality, so I've got to give them the same benefit of the doubt and not try to change their personality.
Very good, very good. Another question we have is reproach a good approach to manage forgiveness?
uh, as I mentioned in the talk, a good reproach won't solve the problem. So it's not like forgiveness. All a good reproach does is it keeps us talking. And so, a bad reproach tends to slam the door, because if I make an aggressive reproach, and accuse them, they will tend to accuse me back. It's just human nature. If you get attacked, either you will withdraw and run away, or you will attack back, almost always. Uh, so a good reproach is a kind of a necessary first step, but that's not going to replace forgiveness or confession or anything like that.
Thank you very, very much. I see that we've covered all our questions for tonight. So once again, thank you very much for all the effort you put into preparing, in delivering and fielding our questions. I see someone has asked, will the slides be sent out? Yes. Will there be a link to the recording? Yes. But Professor Worthington, thank you so much. We look forward to tomorrow night.
Yeah.
Yourself and Melissa will be sharing on the spiritual benefits of forgiveness. So
Right.
to all our participants tonight, please do join us. Thank you, Professor Worthington.
Thank you, Sean. See ya.